The duffel bag was almost the size of his torso. It bounced against his back with every step as Jacob Walsh stepped off the landing platform and into the humid pressure of virulent air, thick with ozone and something faintly metallic. His sleeves were rolled twice over just to reveal his hands, boots still a little too stiff, and collar slightly askew. He adjusted the strap across his shoulder, squared up his pack, and stepped forward. The orientation hall loomed like a cathedral built for gods with questionable architectural taste. Gleaming organic spires curled into themselves like petrified vines. Lights embedded directly in the bone-like walls. Jacob blinked slowly. He was the only human in the room. To his left, a hulking arthropoid cadet, six-legged, hard-shelled, and chewing something that crunched louder than the ambient speaker announcements, glanced down and clicked a mouthpart. Jacob pretended not to notice. In front of him, two feathered avian cadets whispered into each other's shoulder crests, glancing his way. His ears burned. Did someone let in a child? Is that a cadet or a carry-on? Jacob ignored it. Or tried to. His heartbeat thudded in the soft fabric of his uniform. Not fear exactly, just the familiar hum of being underestimated. His bunk was at the end of Dorm A7. Top bunk, as if the scheduler had wanted to make it harder on him. Jacob didn't complain. He hoisted himself up, unpacked silently, and arranged the few photos he'd brought his judo team, his family, a Polaroid of him in the snow with a busted ankle and a proud grin. That one was taped right above his pillow. He got 6 hours of sleep before orientation drills began. They lasted 8 hours. By the end of them, his entire uniform was soaked through, and his shoulders screamed. No one offered help. No one said a word to him at all. That changed in the cafeteria. The place buzzed with chatter in 7 languages, trays clattering, utensils scraping. Cadets sat by species more than by cohort. Jacob stood at the serving counter, nudging a suspicious blue pudding onto his tray, when he heard a voice behind him grating and smug. "Careful, little mammal, you'll get lost between the trays." He turned slowly. Cadet Dryvac of the cellar towered over him, lean and coiled like a spring. His greenish skin shimmered under the lights, wide arms folded across a too-tight uniform. His inner eyelids blinked sideways as he tilted his head. "Did you wander in here by mistake, or do you plan to chew your way through that ration cube with those dull little teeth?" Laughter rippled around the tables. Jacob set his fork down with an audible clink. "You're standing too close to my food." Dryvac blinked once, a flicker of something like confusion, then bared his teeth. "Oh, the insect squeaks. Do you plan to stop me? I could wrap you in one arm and toss you down the waste chute." Jacob rose from his seat. He had to push the chair in first to make space. It made a quiet scraping sound, awkward, undercutting the rising tension. He looked up almost a meter shorter and tilted his head just slightly. "Want to test that?" Gasps rippled around them like shockwaves. Every cadet at the nearest tables froze. Dryvac's nostrils flared. He lunged. It wasn't graceful, just a hard shove aimed at Jacob's chest. Something designed for dominance, not combat. But Jacob moved before the contact landed. He pivoted, turned his shoulder, gripped Dryvac's wrist, and twisted with smooth, trained precision. The crack of Dryvac hitting the floor was like a hammer striking ceramic. A hush swallowed the room. Jacob crouched low, breathing steady. He didn't move like someone caught in a fight, more like someone in a kata, deliberate and practiced. "That's called seoi nage," he said, his voice quiet. "Shoulder throw. Physics doesn't care about size." Dryvac groaned, curling onto one elbow. But pride is louder than pain. He scrambled up again, face dark with rage, and charged. Jacob stepped forward this time, rotated his hips, shifted his balance. Dryvac flew again this time, landing harder, his legs smacking the table's edge. Someone dropped their cup. Jacob adjusted his sleeves, calm fingers folding fabric without haste. "Where I come from," he said, voice level, "we train to use leverage, balance, timing. I've studied judo for years. If you want another demonstration, keep charging. If not, sit down and finish your meal." No one moved. Dryvac's breathing was ragged, but he stayed down this time. After a long moment, he rose stiffly and shuffled to a far table. muttered curses in cellar dialect followed him like a trail of slime. Jacob sat back down, picked up his fork, began eating again. The whispers returned, but changed in tone. Cadets glanced his way, not laughing now. A feathered avian 2 tables over whispered into a datapad. A reptilian cadet with 4 arms muttered something in awe. By nightfall, the murmurs had spread through every corridor. The tiny human flipped Dryvac twice. Some said he was dangerous. Others speculated humans had internal gravity fields. One arthropoid was convinced Jacob had tapped into quantum limb manipulation. In his bunk, Jacob reread a message from home. Then he stretched, adjusted the pillow, and turned off his light. He didn't sleep immediately. His body hurt more than he let on. His wrists were sore, his knees stiff. He'd have bruises tomorrow. But he'd earned silence. And silence was enough. 3 days passed. Jacob kept his head down. He still drew stares in the corridors. Some cadets now gave him extra space when passing, others hovered just close enough to whisper, sometimes into translators, sometimes just into cupped hands. The instructor said nothing about the cafeteria incident, though Commander Veshra, a shriveled Gattalan with one opaque eye and a bionic knee, gave Jacob a long look during drills, not disapproving. Not quite approving either. By the end of the week, Jacob's name was on the partner roster. Survival Field Simulation, the top read, Paired Training, Swamp Terrain Module, Duration, 72 standard hours. Jacob scrolled until he found his name. Paired with Dryvac, Cadet, Cellar Species. He stared at the screen for a full 5 seconds, then he muttered a single, nearly silent word under his breath and started prepping his field pack. They were dropped in on a transport pod, more cargo than passengers. It hummed low through the sky before hissing to a stop, just above the surface of Delta Simulation Quadrant 9, one of the more notoriously miserable training environments. The floor beneath them shimmered with residual engine heat. Outside the pod, the swamp waited. The doors opened. Humidity hit like a wall, thick and sour. The air buzzed with unseen life. Trees loomed with vines that moved even when the wind didn't. The mud, deep brown and glossy, stretched into the distance, punctuated by marsh grass and odd fungal stalks. Dryvac sneered as he stepped out, slinging a thick supply pack over one shoulder. "If you fall in, mammal, I'm not digging you out." Jacob dropped down beside him, knees slightly bent. He was already adjusting to the uneven ground, scanning their surroundings. "We have 72 hours, he said. "Let's not waste the first one arguing." Dryvac huffed and stomped ahead, his heavy steps sinking into the muck with each stride. He didn't wait. Jacob followed at a more careful pace, testing the ground before committing each step. His boots made smaller prints, but he stayed upright. After 30 minutes, Dryvac had already slipped twice. By hour 3, Jacob had chosen a raised mound between 2 twisted trees as a campsite. It wasn't perfect. There were biting flies the size of his thumb, and the mud still crept between roots, but it was higher than the rest and dry enough to sit. Dryvac dumped his pack beside a tree and dropped onto it without grace. "I was told survival drills tested real endurance," he muttered, brushing swamp scum off his thigh. "Not how to picnic in a bog." Jacob ignored him. He was digging a shallow groove between 2 rocks, feeding it dry vine strands stripped of bark. His fire starter clicked against flint. "You'll want to dry your gear," he said. "Nothing ruins a drill like fungal foot rot." Dryvac squinted at him. "You're building a fire?" "Already halfway there." As if summoned by skepticism, a thin curl of smoke rose. The flame caught, orange flickers licking up. Dryvac muttered something in Silur. "You were a food technician before this, weren't you? Or some maintenance class role?" "I was on Earth, yes," Jacob said. "Combat engineer training, with some wilderness survival, and judo club after hours." He said it like he was reading grocery items. Then he reached into his side pouch and pulled out a folded net. "What are you doing now?" "Trapping bugs." Dryvac recoiled slightly. "You eat the insects here?" "No, I study them first. Some are toxic, some are edible. I'll find out which is which." Dryvac turned away with a noise halfway between disgust and pride. "I'll hunt something real." Jacob didn't argue. He set up the trap. covered the fire with a half-shell reflector to keep the smoke low. By dusk, he had 6 different specimens crawling in separate jars. Dryvac came back with mud up to his hips and a limp in his right leg. Did the real prey fight back? Dryvac glared at him, panting. I don't need commentary from a fur-less twig. Jacob said nothing. He had just finished boiling water using a hollowed plant bulb and a fire-warmed rock. He poured a clean dose into 2 ration cups, set one in front of Dryvac without looking. Drink. Dryvac hesitated, then took it. Night fell with a chorus of hoots and distant splashes. Insects pulsed in rhythm, their sounds as much threat as ambiance. Jacob tied together branches into a crude lean-to. He coated the outer layer with ash mud paste from the fire pit, a trick that kept biting insects away, at least for a few hours. Dryvac lay flat on a patch of moss, breathing heavy. You're unusually quiet, Jacob noted. Something bit me. Jacob turned. Where? Dryvac pointed to his lower calf. The skin there was swollen, puffy, red around the edges. A small puncture mark oozed a clear liquid. Jacob knelt and examined it closely. Not venomous, but your body's reacting hard. You'll need to elevate it. Dryvac growled. I'm not. Do you want to lose function in the leg? Dryvac glared. Then propped it up on his pack, muttering. Jacob crushed a few dried leaves he'd tested earlier, and packed them into a paste with clean water. He wrapped the bite with a strip of cloth from his extra undershirt. It'll sting, he said. That's normal. Dryvac hissed through his teeth. You're enjoying this. No, Jacob said. I'm staying alive. You should try it. By the second day, the roles had clearly reversed. Dryvac's pride had taken him deep into the marsh at dawn. He returned an hour later, soaked, scratched, and carrying a bulbous green fungus the size of a helmet. He dropped it with a wet splat. Found food. Jacob looked up from sharpening a stick. You tested it? Dryvac grinned. Smells sweet. That means safe. No, it means sugar content. Some of the most toxic plants smell sweet. Your olfactory system isn't adapted to this biosphere. Dryvac already had a bite in his hand. Don't. Too late. The moment the fungus hit his tongue, Dryvac gagged. His entire body convulsed. He dropped to his knees, spit frothing from his mouth, then dry heaved onto the moss. Jacob didn't shout. He was already moving. Don't swallow. Breathe slow. He forced Dryvac onto his side, checked the airway. Dryvac was groaning now, curling in on himself, stomach muscles spasming. What is happening? Your gut is rejecting it, I warned you. Jacob pulled a rehydration packet from his pack, mixed it with boiled water. He held Dryvac's head upright. Sip this, not fast, slow. Dryvac's hands trembled as he took it. For the next 2 hours he moaned on the ground, weak and pale green, vomiting twice, then once more for good measure. Jacob sat beside him, making notes in a slim notebook. Congratulations, he said after a while. You just ate a highly laxative mycotuber. You knew? I told you to test it. Dryvac rolled over, clutching his gut. You're a demon. Just a guy with biology classes. By the third day, Dryvac no longer stomped ahead. He followed Jacob quietly, watched how he filtered water, asked, grudgingly, if the berries growing from the vine were safe. They weren't. He accepted the insect protein paste. Jacob made that morning barely chewed it, but didn't spit it out. You always like this? Dryvac asked that afternoon, watching Jacob patch the final seam in their upgraded shelter. Like what? Prepared. Jacob paused. I don't like surprises. That's not what I mean. Jacob sat down, cracked his knuckles. His hands were blistered, shoulders ached from the weight of days in the swamp. But his voice stayed calm. I train so I don't have to rely on strength alone. That's not always an option. Dryvac glanced away. You fight well, even if you look like a shaved hatchling. Jacob chuckled once. You learn that kind of thing when you're the smallest in every group. Survival favors adaptability. Dryvac didn't reply. But he didn't insult him either. That night they sat in silence, listening to swamp frogs and alien birds sing their discordant lullabies. Dryvac leaned back against a root and pulled a thermal wrap over his torso. Jacob watched the fire. Respect didn't need words. Sometimes, it just needed time, and a very bad mushroom. The retrieval drone arrived just after midday on the fourth day, cutting through the haze with a low, pulsing thrum that stirred the trees. Jacob and Dryvac stood side by side at the extraction beacon, mud-streaked, sun-salted, and several kilograms lighter. Dryvac looked worse off. His skin, usually a smooth green, was mottled with red irritation from a persistent vine rash. His right leg was stiff from the infected bite, though Jacob's careful dressings had kept it from festering. His pride, however, looked the most bruised. They didn't speak as the platform extended and magnetically locked onto the beacon. Jacob adjusted the strap on his pack, one side sagging from a broken clasp he hadn't bothered fixing. He had rationed well, carried enough dried bugs to get through another day if needed. His insect-repelling ash paste had worked, and his shelter, half collapsed by now, had stayed dry through the rains. Dryvac had eaten dirt, vomited violently, gotten bitten, and at one point mistook a thermal coil for a venomous snake. Jacob had calmly flicked it aside with a stick. As the drone lifted off, the swamp shrank beneath them into a brown and green smear. Dryvac glanced once at Jacob, then looked away quickly. Neither of them spoke until the debrief room. Medical first. Jacob's vitals, dehydrated but stable, minor abrasions, bruised right shoulder from a fall on day 2, blistered feet from swamp water exposure, and a low-grade infection in one knuckle from a thorn scratch. Standard antibiotic cream twice daily, the medtech said, scanning his hand. Blisters drained or intact? Left intact. I know the protocol. The tech blinked, then nodded without comment. Dryvac, however, had a longer checklist. Moderate dehydration. Intestinal inflammation from ingesting a Class 2 mycotoxin. Rash-induced dermatitis on lower back and legs. Mild cellulitis around insect bite site. 6% body weight loss. He growled through most of the treatment, especially the antiseptic spray. Jacob, sitting 2 beds away, didn't gloat. He didn't even glance over until the nurse said, "You're lucky your teammate knew what to do." Dryvac made a sound like a deflating tire. The debrief room was cool, circular, and quiet. Holo recorders buzzed silently overhead. Commander Veshra sat on the elevated seat at the center, her one good eye scanning the file in front of her. Team 21, she said without looking up. Survival duration, full 72 hours. No early extraction, no fatalities. No transmissions, flagged for emergency. Jacob sat straight. Dryvac slouched beside him, still moving stiffly. Veshra tapped her file. Observation notes indicate that Cadet Dryvac sustained a series of self-inflicted injuries due to environmental mismanagement, incorrect food identification, and inadequate personal care. Intervention from Cadet Walsh mitigated potential complications. Dryvac shifted, jaw flexing. "Would you care to elaborate, Cadet Walsh?" Veshra asked, finally looking up. Jacob cleared his throat. "I followed standard protocols. Identified edible food using sensory and skin contact testing, avoided still water sources, built elevated shelters, and applied basic field medical care as needed." "Noted," Veshra said. She turned to Dryvac. "Cadet?" Dryvac didn't speak at first, then his jaw twitched. "I misjudged the terrain. And your teammate?" A pause. "Was more competent than anticipated." Veshra blinked once. Understatement, acknowledged, dismissed. They stood and left the room. No one said anything until they reached the corridor. The air was drier here, the floor smooth under boots that still squished faintly with waterlogged soles. Dryvac exhaled through his nostrils. Jacob gave him a sidelong glance. "You okay?" The seller didn't respond for a few steps. Then quietly, "When I first saw you, I thought I could break you in half." Jacob nodded. "I know. I didn't realize. Humans study how not to be broken." Jacob smiled faintly. "We don't like being underestimated." Another pause. Dryvac grunted. "I still think you look like a dehydrated mammalian larva." Jacob's smile widened. "Noted." By that evening, the academy was already buzzing. Rumors traveled faster than light speed on base. Dryvac was carried out on a stretcher. No, he begged the human for help. He'd eaten mud. No. Fungus. Something green. Or maybe it had legs. He nearly died, and the human just boiled water and saved him with leaf wrap. The truth didn't matter much. The effect did. Jacob's name was now spoken with both caution and curiosity. A group of arthropoid cadets from Section D stopped him during meal rotation. "You bent physics," one said, mandibles twitching excitedly. "It's not bending," Jacob said patiently. "It's judo. You use your opponent's energy against them." "That sounds like field manipulation." Another piped in. "Does it involve gravity tricks?" "No, just leverage." The cadets exchanged notes like students in a lab. Later, an avian instructor intercepted him during corridor patrol. "You used insect repellent made from ash paste?" "Yes, sir." "Yes. Was that in the manual?" "No, sir. It was a field improvisation, based on chemical camouflage behavior in some Terran species." The instructor blinked, feathers fluffing slightly. "Interesting." By the time evening drills ended, 3 more cadets had approached Jacob, asking to observe his martial routines. One was nearly twice his size and carried a Morningstar-shaped training weapon on his back. Jacob didn't gloat, but he started to keep a training schedule on his bunkboard for curious observers. Dryvac, for his part, didn't apologize. He didn't offer friendship either. But 2 days later, he arrived at the practice ring just after dusk, when the academy lights cast long shadows across the gravel. Jacob was finishing a set of solo throws with a weighted dummy when he heard footsteps. Dryvac stood at the edge of the mat, arms folded. "I want to see it again," he said flatly. "See what?" "The throw. You made it look effortless. I know it wasn't." Jacob nodded once, then stepped forward. "I'll go slow this time." They trained for 20 minutes. Dryvac asked no more than 3 questions, but he listened. By the end of the session, he was panting from the effort. His form was awkward, but improving. He stepped wrong, twice, and Jacob corrected it without sarcasm. "You've got reach," Jacob said, "but you need to lower your center when pivoting. You're fighting your own weight." Dryvac grunted. "How do you know all this?" "I got thrown a lot as a kid." Dryvac blinked at him, then chuckled once, a single low sound, gone in a breath. They didn't shake hands when it ended. They didn't need to. That night, Jacob returned to his dorm and opened a message from Earth. His older sister had sent a video clip of their dog trying to dig under a snowbank. He watched it twice, smiling. Above his bed, his photos remained, his team, his family, the busted ankle snow photo with a grin that mirrored the one he wore now. He was still the smallest cadet in the academy. But no one said fragile anymore. They said, "Don't mess with him." He threw Dryvac, twice. Survived a swamp. Kept his head. Jacob Walsh didn't feel like a predator. But he wasn't prey either. Not anymore. Week 7 arrived with a full contact drill, the kind that left cadets bruised, breathless, and proud, or at least limping with their heads held high. The event, held in Arena 12, had been scheduled weeks in advance, but the entire academy knew it would double as a proving ground, not just for techniques, but reputations. It wasn't official policy, of course, but word spread that several instructors had quietly adjusted pairings, just enough to see if the rumors held weight. Cadet Walsh's name appeared next to Cadet Razik, an upper-year avian, with a wingspan nearly 3 meters wide, talons like carving tools, and a tendency to move like she was gliding, even while walking. Her record included simulated hostage extractions, tactical air rescues, and a sparring win ratio that turned heads. "Don't get skewered," Dryvac muttered, as they filed into the prep chamber. Jacob finished tightening his belt. "Thanks for the pep talk." "Just saying, if she breaks a bone, stay down. That's what I'd do." Jacob didn't reply. His mind was already elsewhere. Breath patterns, timing, likely angles. The real trick wouldn't be winning. It would be surviving long enough to leave an impression without leaving a trail of bruised bone marrow. The buzzer sounded. They stepped into the ring. Arena 12 was packed. Cadets lined the observation deck, pressed to the railings. A few instructors took seats above, data pads in hand, styluses idle but ready. Jacob didn't bow. The academy didn't teach it. but he gave a respectful nod to Razik, who returned it with a curt dip of her beak. Then, she moved. She was fast. Too fast for someone her size. Her talons swept low, baiting a jump then high, angling for a feint into Jacob's flank. He didn't fall for it. He rolled sideways, ducked under a wing strike, and pivoted to Razik's rear. She spun too fast to catch. The match turned into a dance, but not an even one. Jacob fought to stay in rhythm, conserving energy, looking for openings. He wasn't going to overpower her. That was obvious, but he could redirect. He waited. On her next charge, she extended a talon just slightly too far. Jacob caught her elbow joint with both hands, used her own momentum, and dropped into a classic judo sweep. She stumbled not down, but enough. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jacob breathed through his nose, calming his pulse. His ribs ached from an earlier near hit. His right knee was complaining. But he wasn't winded. Yet. Razik came again, a full body rush. He sidestepped and tried for a drop throw. She braced. Adapted. Locked her wing under his arm and flipped him instead. Jacob hit the mat hard. Pain flared through his shoulder. He grunted but rolled, protecting the joint. No crunch, no dislocation. He still had use of the arm. He backed away, breathing faster. Razik slowed her advance. She hadn't expected him to get back up so cleanly. That made two of them. "You don't yield," she said. "Not until it's over." She lunged. Jacob spun, planted, and used her weight to arc her over his hip. It wasn't clean. She caught herself midair, and only half fell, landing on one knee. But the throw happened. The crowd exhaled in shock. The match timer buzzed. Draw. Jacob's chest heaved. His shoulder throbbed. But his stance remained steady. Razik stood, rolled her wing once, then offered a hand. He took it. That was the moment the academy stopped whispering. The next day, the cafeteria was different. Jacob sat alone, as usual, but not for lack of invitation. 3 different tables had asked him to join. He'd declined politely, preferring the quiet for now. But cadets passed him without comment. No laughter. No jokes about trays or height or being mistaken for someone's toddler. Even the kitchen tech, a moss-covered biped named Flurg, slid him an extra ration cube with a conspiratorial nod. Drivak dropped into the seat across from him without asking. "You're limping," he said. "Just sore, no real damage." "You flipped Razik." "Almost. It was a partial." Drivak tapped a claw against his tray. "Doesn't matter. You got her to the ground. That's more than most." Jacob nodded. "You eat yet?" "Half of this," Drivak said, lifting a chunk of green protein slab. "Still recovering from the fungus. Your kind calls it trauma, right?" Jacob laughed under his breath. "Close enough." There was a long pause. The cafeteria noise faded into background hum. Drivak leaned in slightly. "You ever think we're all too focused on force?" Jacob looked up. "You mean as cadets?" "No, as species. We build big, fight big, flex hard, and then one of you shows up and quietly rewrites the rules using gravity and bugs and duct tape." Jacob stirred his hydration gel. "Most humans don't train this hard. I just didn't have the luxury of being naturally intimidating." Drivak squinted. "Then why keep pushing?" Jacob hesitated. "My older brother was military," he said finally. "Lost a leg during a flood rescue, no enemy. Just the planet itself." He always said, "Train like you're already injured. Then when the real thing happens, you're not starting from zero." Drivak was silent a moment. "That's grim." Jacob shrugged. "It's also why I'm still standing." Drivak reached over and swiped one of Jacob's spare nutrient pods without asking. Jacob didn't protest. A week later, during xenobiology rotation, Jacob was invited to speak to a group of first years about field improvisation. Instructor Balan, a gelatinous tripedal with a photographic memory, had specifically requested him. He covered basics. Edible plant testing. How to boil water without a container. How to track without leaving prints. He explained judo briefly, but emphasized that martial skills meant little without control and patience. "You don't need to be stronger," he told them. "Just smarter. And ready." Afterward, 3 cadets stayed behind to ask more questions. One wanted to train with him, one wanted to borrow his notes, one just said, "Thank you," and left without another word. Jacob still woke early, still rolled his sleeves twice so they wouldn't cover his hands, still trained alone most mornings, stretching and moving with quiet intention while others slept. But things were different now. When he passed cadets in the corridor, they nodded. When the instructors looked at him, they paused sometimes, long enough to register a kind of growing acknowledgement. When drills were announced, he was no longer the wild card. He was a variable, a factor. No longer dismissed, no longer underestimated. The smallest cadet in the Interstellar Academy had been tested in body, in skill, and in the heart of the swamp. And while size hadn't changed, perception had. Dryvac said it best, a few days later, during mess cleanup duty. He stood beside Jacob, scrubbing a tray, and muttered without looking. "You weren't prey, Walsh. Not even at the start. You were just camouflaged." Jacob grinned. "That's the idea,"